Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about a truly disgusting article that was posted on the BBC News website on the 26th of October, that being "We're being pressured into sex by some trans women," written by Carolyn Lowbridge. Now, hateful transphobic bigotry is very much the norm throughout most of the British news media, but for various reasons this article stands out as especially repulsive. This article attempts to make the case that cis lesbians are being sexually assaulted by predatory trans women on a level that goes beyond the actions of individuals. Cis lesbians as a group are in danger from trans women, is the point this article is trying to make. Now, of course, a member of any group of people can pressure or coerce someone into sex, but we cannot use that fact to tar the whole group with the same brush. Using the actions of an individual to discriminate against an entire group is, well, it's discrimination, isn't it? The BBC could just as well print "We're being pressured into sex by some cis lesbians" and use isolated incidents of people being sexually assaulted by cis lesbians to make the case that the lesbian community is inherently dangerous. Now, that would be ridiculous homophobic discrimination, and exactly as valid as this article. The BBC would not write the articles "We're being pressured into sex by some black men" or "We're being pressured into sex by some Jews," but it can get away with writing the exact same thing about trans women because of the media environment into which it's being released, which is an openly transphobic one. So I disagree with this article in conception. I think it is a textbook case of bigoted discrimination, but it gets much worse, trust me. Now, for an article with this title, you might expect it would mainly be concerned with people being pressured into sex by trans women, but the article contains only 2 reported instances of trans women pressuring someone into sex. It's actually much more concerned with hypothetical scenarios or with differences of opinion within the LGBT community that have nothing whatsoever to do with trans women pressuring people into sex. For instance, it tells the story of a cis lesbian whose girlfriend wanted them to have a threesome with a trans woman, but she didn't want to, and they had an argument about that. Now, no trans woman is pressuring anyone here. They're not even involved in the story directly. This is something going on between 2 cis women. This story has no business being alongside someone saying, "I was actually pressured into sex," as if those 2 things are equivalent. Now, in an attempt to prove that trans women pressuring people into sex is an actual phenomenon and not just a number of isolated incidents, the same as we would expect of any group, the article cites a questionnaire distributed by the fringe transphobic hate group Get the L Out, which reported that of the 80 women who did respond, 56% reported being pressured or coerced to accept a trans woman as a sexual partner. Now, there are lots of problems with this questionnaire. Firstly, it specifically refuses to gender trans women correctly, using he and him throughout. Given that, and the fact that Get the L Out distributed this study via social media, gives rise to obvious bias issues, specifically in terms of who would respond to this clearly biased, hateful propaganda in the first place. But a bigger issue is what the questionnaire considers to be pressure or coercion. In the section of the findings which reports the 56% figure, it states most respondents reported being subjected to such rhetoric directly or indirectly, with the general feeling that it's online everywhere and relentless. Now, this is not trans women pressuring people into sex. This is some transphobes seeing trans acceptance on the internet and not liking that. They don't think that trans women are women, so when they see people online treating trans women as women, they take that as a personal attack. But it isn't. And we see a similar attitude in the section titled Deception. Several respondents discussed their experiences of deception while being approached by trans women they assumed to be women. They reported feeling betrayed and violated. So just trans women passing is being classed as deception here. They're taking it personally. They're acting like by itself a trans woman passing is an attack upon them. What is being included as pressure or coercion here is simply trans women existing. And we see a very clear indication of this when the questionnaire shares that awful quote by Janice Raymond comparing trans people's existence at all to the act of rape. And it is incredibly unfair to actual survivors of sexual assault to have their experiences categorized alongside things like "I didn't realize someone was trans," or "not enough people are being transphobic on the internet," or simply just "trans people exist." This is just hate speech very shoddily dressed up as a study, and it is utterly embarrassing that the BBC shared this as if it was legitimate. But to be clear here, even though this rubbish is clearly discriminatory and put out by an obviously biased group and pads what we can mockingly call its findings with utter irrelevancies, I am absolutely not casting doubt on any of the respondents who reported actual sexual harassment or coercion. All I will say is that firstly, we cannot use their individual experiences to discriminate against an entire group of people, and secondly, nobody at the BBC responsible for sharing the findings of this study cares at all about women being sexually assaulted. Carolyn Lowbridge does not care about women being sexually assaulted, except for how she can use that to attack trans people. And this is not something I say lightly. There is absolute proof here. You see, this article featured prominently as a source Lilykade, an adult film performer who, quote, went by the label Porn Valley's Gold Star Lesbian because she only ever had sex with other women. Now, I dislike the very gatekeepy gold star lesbian phrase there, but leaving that aside, Cade gets quoted several times in the article, and there's also a big picture of her posing for the cameras there. So, trusted BBC source Lilykade here, giving her thoughts about trans women pressuring people into sex. Now, there's an issue with this, and that is Lilykade is someone who is accused of and has admitted to a series of sexual assaults. Multiple people in the industry Lilykade worked in reported that she sexually assaulted them, and this is something that was known about long before this article came out. So what is Lilykade doing here, being given a platform by the BBC to share her thoughts in an article about women being pressured into sex? If the BBC cared about women being pressured into sex, why not mention that their source has a history of sexually assaulting women? So we can say, maybe they didn't know. Maybe Carolyn Lowbridge, when writing this article, didn't bother to Google the names of the people she was talking to, or maybe just nobody informed her of the allegations against Lilykade. Except that's not true, and we can prove it. And to do so, we first need to correct an outright lie in the article. So, in the section of the article titled "Who Else Was Approached?", Carolyn Lowbridge writes, "In addition to Veronica Ivy, I contacted several other high-profile trans women who have either written or spoken about sex and relationships. None of them wanted to speak to me, but my editors and I felt it was important to reflect some of their views in this piece." Now, this is not true. So, Chelsea Poe is a high-profile trans woman who has spoken extensively about sex and relationships, being interviewed in the Huffington Post, Glamour, Slate, and so on. Chelsea Poe claims that she was interviewed by Carolyn Lowbridge for the BBC article, but that her contribution was cut. She also claims that she informed the BBC about the sexual assaults carried out by Lilykade, but that, to quote a PinkNews article about this incident, there was not much of a reaction from the journalist. Now, we know that this interview took place. Chelsea Poe tweeted about talking to the BBC and Carolyn Lowbridge in September of last year, and the BBC itself confirmed to PinkNews that Lowbridge interviewed Poe, but that, quote, her contribution was judged not to be relevant to the story. Her contribution, which included informing the BBC about the multiple sexual assaults carried out by their source, Lilykade, was judged not to be relevant. Now, firstly here, the BBC has been caught in an outright falsehood, obviously. The article states, today, it still says this, that no high-profile trans women wanted to talk to Carolyn Lowbridge, while neglecting to mention that they did. They were interviewed, and then she cut them. And now she's pretending that nobody wanted to talk to her, that she couldn't find a willing participant to give an alternate viewpoint. And this is just lying. Just open lying. Secondly, this article is purportedly about women feeling pressured into sex, and you were told one of your main sources is someone who repeatedly sexually assaulted women. How could that not be relevant? It couldn't be more relevant. It seems obvious to say, but if Carolyn Lowbridge or anyone at the BBC responsible for this article cared at all about women being sexually assaulted, they never would have given a platform to someone who they knew, they were told, sexually assaulted women. The only problem for them here is that Lilykade isn't trans. Her sexual assaults can't be weaponized to attack trans people, so her sexual assaults don't count. They're not relevant. Lilykade's actions speak only to her behaviour for some reason, and not any group she belongs to. Lilykade is afforded the dignity of being considered responsible for her own actions, not like those trans women who must be judged as a group for the actions of individuals. And of course, there is the additional indignity done to the anonymous survivors of sexual assault quoted in the article who were made to share a platform alongside someone who sexually assaulted women. Now, it might be hard to believe this, but this story gets even worse. You see, Lilykade used the spotlight given to her by the BBC. She used the attention this article generated for her to publish a deranged genocidal manifesto, seriously, calling for the murder of all trans women, which included naming specific trans women she wanted to personally, quote, lynch. And perhaps most pertinent for the topic at hand today, Lilykade didn't just make death threats, but also rape threats against the families of trans people. Now, after several days of trying to ignore that this happened, the BBC caved to pressure and removed Lilykade's contribution from the article. And the editorial note they included with the article reads as follows. We have updated this article published last week to remove a contribution from one individual in light of comments she has published on blog posts in recent days, which we have been able to verify. We acknowledge that an admission of inappropriate behaviour by the same contributor should have been included in the original article. So firstly, note the lack of apology for platforming a rapist who writes serial killer manifestos. But also, what's with the euphemisms here? In light of comments she published, I guess that's what we're calling explicit death threats now, comments, and inappropriate behaviour. Now, the article itself uses terms like rape and sexual assault when attributing those things to trans women, so why did they only talk about what Lilykade did euphemistically? And an admission of inappropriate behaviour should have been included? Apparently it would have been fine to platform Lilykade if only they'd included an admission of her, quote, inappropriate behaviour. And how would that work? What would they have said, even? Lilykade, admitted rapist, has some concerns about women being pressured into sex. What sense would that make? No, including Cade at all was wrong, the BBC. You do not get to weasel out of this. You must and will take this article down and give a full apology for it. Not just for platforming Lilykade, but for the outright lies, the terrible research, and the disgusting, bigoted premise. Now, you might notice that I'm a little annoyed about this, and I admit it, I am. This is awful. The BBC is supposed to be better than this. It isn't, clearly, but it's supposed to be. This article will be deleted and apologised for eventually, depending on how stubborn the BBC wants to be about it, which at the moment is very stubborn. But before it is deleted, I feel compelled to speak up about it. I don't like that this is happening in the BBC. I don't like that this is happening in my country. And I want to be able to say, in the future, that I said something about it at the time. So what I'm going to do, in addition to making this video, is submit a complaint to the BBC. And I would encourage you to also make a complaint, only if you feel compelled to do so, of course. And we can do it together right now, actually. So the BBC is a worldwide service, and they accept complaints from anywhere, so don't worry if you're outside the UK. I'll include a link in the video description to the complaints page, which looks like this, and then I'm going to click the Make a Complaint button there, which takes us to this page. From the drop-down menu under What is your complaint about, I'm going to select BBC website or apps, and then BBC News website. When it asks for the URL, I'm going to paste the URL of the awful news article, which I'll include below. Then, are you contacting us about a previous complaint? No, and continue. So select the best category to describe your complaint, and honestly, it could be anything here. Bias, factual error, offence, poor quality. But I'm going to select factual error or inaccuracy here. You see, my gut is telling me to focus on the one particular lie about no prominent trans women wanting to talk to the author of the article. It is an obvious falsehood, it is very easy to express, and it's impossible to refute. The BBC cannot respond honestly here in any way except to further amend the article to remove this lie. Anything else they say in response will make them look even more biased. I will include the text of my complaint in the video description, but would encourage you to, only if you feel like it of course, complain about any or all of the various problems with the article. And maybe you could share your complaints in the comments to perhaps inspire people in forming their own complaints. I'm also going to select that I do want a response to my complaint, because I want to see what they say in their defense here. Now before I go today, I just want to address one response that I know this video will get. You see, the article qualifies its criticism of trans women by saying some trans women, a minority of trans women, and so on. So they can't be being biased because they're saying it's a problem specific to some trans women, not all trans women. This is a cowardly tactic intended to provide cover for the BBC while it shares the messages of anti-trans hate groups. The BBC is being biased regardless of these cowardly qualifiers. As we've seen today, some cis lesbians, like Lilykade, pressure people into sex, but the BBC are not writing that article, are they? Of course, if Lilykade was trans, she would be featured prominently here as one of the trans women pressuring people into sex, but because she isn't trans, Lilykade gets quietly cut from the story. So I don't buy these qualifiers. I don't think they're meant honestly. If they were meant honestly, then this article wouldn't exist. Anyway, that's all from me today, folks. I'll see you next time.